keeps. I'm Bobby Friction, and I'm about to find out how rap in India is starting a revolution which will be heard around the world.
OS is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello, welcome to OS with me, Connie Sharp, live from the BBC in London. Two presidents, two speeches, both taking place today, Tuesday, just a few days ahead of the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The first one by Russia's Vladimir Putin, spoken at length earlier today in his State of Union address. The Russian president blamed the West for provoking the war and escalating it, saying that the United States and its allies sought limitless power. He also said he was suspending Russia's participation in a major arms control agreement with the US, which is the last remaining nuclear arms deal between Moscow and Washington. Well, one speech done, but one still to go. The United States President Joe Biden is due to give his speech in Ukraine's neighboring country, Poland. That's following his visit to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, on Monday. We're going to get reaction here on OS and analysis to both speeches here. Do stay with us.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. President Putin has delivered a fiercely anti-Western, nationalistic set-piece address to Russian parliamentarians in an attempt to justify his invasion of Ukraine. He blamed the West for the year-long war, accusing it of trying to make Ukraine into an anti-Russia, and saying the existence of his nation was at stake. Mr. Putin promised to continue the campaign step by step, but made no declarations of new offensives and was unable to announce any new military victories. Yevgeny Popov, a deputy in the Duma, claimed it was a war to defend Russia.
Our war is for our security guarantees. He told us many times, when you moving your NATO infrastructure to our border closer and closer every given year. Of course, it's a direct threat for Russian people, and we should defend our borders.
There's been strong condemnation of President Putin's announcement in his speech that Russia will suspend participation in the last remaining nuclear arms treaty with the United States. The New START treaty, recently extended to 2026, limits the number of strategic nuclear warheads the two countries can deploy. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, told reporters the two largest nuclear powers ought to act responsibly.
The announcement by Russia that it's suspending participation in New START is deeply unfortunate and irresponsible. We'll be watching carefully to see what Russia actually does. We'll, of course, make sure that in any event we are postured appropriately for the security of our own country and that of our allies.
The head of the Russian paramilitary group Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has accused the defense minister in Moscow and the chief of the general staff of what he said was a treasonous attempt to destroy the group. Here's Danny Eberhard.
Yevgeny Prigozhin regularly launches public attacks on Russia's military establishment over Ukraine, doubtless protected by his close links to President Putin. He's blamed them for territorial losses and denounced what he sees as a failure to recognize Wagner fighters' achievements on the front line. Recently, he's repeatedly accused them of starving his militia of shells and ammunition in places such as Bakhmut. Now he's accusing Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and the Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov of issuing such orders, alleging they're also depriving his troops of air transport and shovels for digging trenches.
President Biden is expected to challenge Mr. Putin's vision of the war in Ukraine in a speech in Poland shortly. He'll urge the world's democracies to continue standing up to Russian aggression and defend the principle of freedom. Mr. Biden has been holding talks in Warsaw with the Polish President Andrzej Duda, who's been one of Ukraine's strongest advocates. This is Moira Alderson with the latest world news from the BBC. Germany's denounced as absolutely unacceptable a death sentence imposed by an Iranian court on an Iranian-German dual national. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock promised a strong reaction to the sentencing of Jamshid Sharmad. She said he hadn't had anything approaching a fair trial. The presidential candidate for Nigeria's governing All Progressives Congress, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has held his final large election rally, addressing thousands of supporters in a stadium in Lagos. The city is key to his bid to succeed Muhammadu Buhari, Mayeni Jones reports.
Mr. Tinubu very much views Lagos as his stronghold. He was governor here from 1999 to 2007 and in many ways helped shape Nigeria's economic hub into its current form. Often referred to as the godfather of Nigerian politics, he's claimed he was instrumental in securing President Muhammadu Buhari's past 2 victories at the ballot box. The Lagos governors who've succeeded him have been his protégés.
One of France's last surviving women resistance fighters from the Second World War, Simone Seguin, has died at the age of 97. She became famous after being photographed with a gun in the town of Chartres. Hugh Schofield reports.
This brave and beautiful girl is a veteran of partisan fighting.
Born into a farming family near Chartres, Simone Seguin joined the French resistance in 1944, and when Chartres fell to the Allies in August of that year, she was there with the liberators. American war correspondents knew they had a good story when they saw this 18-year-old blonde in shorts and Schmeisser machine pistol bringing up the rear of a party of German prisoners. Her picture went round the world once, and then again when she took part a few days later in the liberation of Paris. Her role in the resistance was a minor one, and after the war she returned to obscurity, becoming a pediatric nurse. But her image became one of a handful that helped define the war in France, and the heroic role of some of the French in bringing the occupation to an end.
BBC News.
Hello, welcome to OS with me, Kani Shah. Thank you so much for your company. It's really good to have you with us. In around 15 minutes, we're going to be going to Lagos in Nigeria, catching up with my colleague Alan Kasuja. Alan's there throughout this week, talking to Nigerians about what matters to them most ahead of their big election day on Saturday. It's a big moment for Africa's largest democracy, and the conversations that Alan has been having with the people on the ground have been really insightful, so do stay with us for that. But first, we're going to start with 2 important speeches taking place today. Just a few hours ago, we heard the first one. Russia's President Putin addressed his people in his State of Nation speech. I'm looking up at my screens, and the second one is going to take place in the next 20 minutes or so with President Joe Biden, and the podium in Warsaw is all set. There is someone speaking. We're trying to establish who that is, but President Biden has met with Poland's President Duda. But back to President Putin's speech, he made a series of attacks, in fact, against the United States and the West. It comes ahead of the first anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine this week, and that's why we're looking at these 2 speeches in some detail here on OS. In the only major announcement, President Putin said he was suspending Russia's participation in a major arms control agreement with the United States. Now, we've pieced together some of what he said over his 2-hour address. Let's take a listen.
Starting from 2014, the Donbass has been fighting, proving the right to live in its own land and speak its native language, fighting without surrender in the environment of blockade and constant threats and hatred that was coming from the Kiev regime, waiting for Russia to come for assistance. So we stick to our position that the modern world must not discriminate between the so-called civilized countries and everyone else. We need honest partnerships that would exclude any exclusivity. To say nothing of the force. We were open to a constructive dialogue with the West. We were insisting that Europe and the entire world required an indivisible and equal security system. For many years we were proposing to our Western partners to discuss that idea and to work for its implementation, but in response we've got unintelligible or hypocritical statements. Kiev regime's aspirations to get nuclear weapons, and they spoke publicly about that. United States and NATO were speedily deploying their military bases, secret biological weapons, were mastering the future theater of military actions, were training the Kiev regime, the Ukraine enslaved by them, for a huge war. And now they admitted publicly, openly, without embarrassment. They look like proud of their infidelity. They call it a diplomatic show. bluff. That means all the time when the Donbass was burning, blood was shedding, when Russia was sincerely aspiring to a peaceful resolution, they were playing on people's life. They were playing by dishonest cards, as they say. That's disgusting way of fraud, of deceit. It's well known. They destroyed Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya in the same manner. That they can never cleanse themselves from that disgrace.
Well, that was basically the interpretation of President Putin's speech there, English interpreter speaking over that. Now, the White House has said that Russia blaming the West for the invasion was absurd. Vitaly Shevchenko is the Russia editor for BBC Monitoring. What stood out for him from President Putin's speech? Here's his analysis.
Well, on the one hand, it was completely and utterly unsurprising. The evil West plotting to destroy Russia, the neo-Nazis running Ukraine, Ukraine historically belonging to Russia, and Russia being not at war with the Ukrainian people, trying to liberate them from the tyranny of these neo-Nazis. We've heard it all before. This is not new at all. But importantly, what was missing from President Putin's speech is any indication of how his special military operation is actually going. And the reason why he chose not to dwell on the progress of his campaign in Ukraine too much is because he couldn't really give much in terms of good news to eager audiences at home. Of course, there are significant numbers of Russians who support this war, who want to hear about victories and achievements in Ukraine. But on that front, President Putin didn't really have much to say, and that's going to be underwhelming for them.
What was really interesting as well was there was just absolutely no sign of reconciliation, no olive branch there. He normally goes on talking for hours. It only lasted 2 hours. That wasn't very long at all.
It was full of defiance, and if anyone's looking for signs of President Putin looking for what's known as an off-ramp to extricate himself from the trouble that he's got into Ukraine, it just wasn't there. He is obviously not ready, not willing to de-escalate. He's as determined as ever, and the closest he got to speaking about how things are going for him in Ukraine was when he said that Russia would achieve its objectives step by step. But that doesn't really amount to huge progress 1 year on after the start of this war.
Talk to us about the one significant thing that he did say, though, Vitaly. He said that he was suspending that agreement that Russia had with the United States with regards to the arms control treaty.
It was a big announcement when President Putin said that Russia was suspending its participation in the New START treaty, which is perhaps the only remaining post-Cold War pillar on which the fragile relationship between Russia and the United States rests. It's a treaty that limits the number of nuclear warheads. So from that point of view, this is hugely significant. But, and it's a big but, the treaty provides for mutual inspections of nuclear facilities both in Russia and the United States. And there have been no such inspections since the year 2020. And earlier this year in January, the United States accused Russia of violating this treaty by not allowing these inspections. So in practical terms, it seems that the treaty wasn't working anyway, so what he announced was a statement of how things are. And the bigger question perhaps is, does this mean that Russia is going to make more nuclear weapons or more nuclear weapons research? That remains to be found out because Russia right now is still focused on producing enough conventional missiles for Ukraine, so making nuclear weapons would be a bit of a struggle.
That's interesting. The fact that actually nothing was going on inside the agreement, as you said, of the Arms Control Treaty. Now, whilst he was giving his speech, we saw shelling in Kherson. What's been the reaction to that and the reaction to President Vladimir Putin's speech in general?
Well, if you look at reaction in Ukraine, people obviously didn't pay as much attention to the speech as perhaps the audiences within Russia. And the fact that Kherson, the southern city in Ukraine, was shelled, it just goes to show that despite President Putin's assurances that he is not at war with the people of Ukraine, it is actually the people of Ukraine who are dying on a daily basis because of his war, and that's how it's seen in Ukraine. In Russia, looking at state TV today, of course, this is what they're going to be talking about for the rest of the day and perhaps tomorrow, the essence of President Putin's speech. But in terms of the geopolitics of Russia versus the West and Russia versus Ukraine, I don't think it changed much. I don't think it revealed much. It was more of the same, really.
That's the BBC's Vitaly Shevchenko. You're listening to OS with me, Connie Sharp, here on the BBC. Now, we're talking about reaction. We're going to play out your reaction that you've been sending us during the course of the day to President Putin's speech. And if you want to send us your thoughts on what you thought, the number is +4477 30 75 19 25. Do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Now, in 4 days' time, voters in Nigeria will go to the polls to elect their next president. And some say this is the election where young people in Nigeria could make a difference. With 93.5 million registered voters, this is by far Africa's biggest election. And more than a third of those voters are young people under the age of 35, who potentially are gearing up to vote after years of low turnout. Now, all this week on OS, we're spending time with my colleague Alan Kasuja, who is in the country's very busy city of Lagos, where he's been gauging the mood of the people, finding out what issues matter to them ahead of Saturday's election. Alan, just 4 days away, Alan, from the election now. What's the mood like there?
I think people are pretty much ready to vote, Connie. People have been discussing elections for very many months, probably for years, and especially young people have been talking about this for a very long time here in not just Lagos, where I'm seated, but across Nigeria. And just to give you a sense of where I am, I'm Alfred Rwani Road, and it's on an island. It's part of the island in Lagos, right? I'm getting this right, guys, am I not?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
yes,
surrounded
you are.
by young people, and they're telling me, making sure that I'm getting this right. And it used to be called Kingsway Road, and it has been renamed after Chief Alfred Rwani. If you hear any hooting in the background, it's because the traffic is building up. People are leaving the island to go back home, and many people live on the mainland. Accurate description, Kechi.
You're right, Alan. It's close of work, and so traffic has started building up. People are heading towards the third mainland bridge, which is the longest bridge in the entire Africa.
Oh, wow, interesting. Now, Kechi, if you know her voice, is obviously our West Africa business correspondent. Kechi Obona, she was with me on Tuesday yesterday, but she's now back to give us a sense of what the young people are thinking. I'm also joined by two young people. Introduce yourself.
Hi, Naomi here. I'm a fourth-year law student and a content creator, and I'm here with my friend. It will be also a fourth-year law student. No content creating in my books, so just a fourth-year.
Okay, so you are both students, friends. You've been friends a long time?
Yeah, we've been friends for over a decade.
Yeah. So, and one of the things you told me about yourselves is that you're both intellectually inclined.
Yeah.
And this is why you've been friends a long time.
Yes, true that.
Now, just what is going through your head 4 days to the elections?
4 days to the elections. I can feel the tension. Like, there's a lot of tension. Everybody is ready to give it their best. Unlike before, like, I feel like a lot of Nigerians we're not really pressed about the situation at hand. But seeing what we've had to go through for the past 8 years, I feel we're ready. We're very much ready.
When you say ready, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Ready to give it our best. Stand up,
What does that
go out
mean?
to vote.
Ready to give it your best?
For example, in the past, we do used to stand up to go out to vote. Some people would literally have their PVCs and be indoors.
Right.
Some people would have their PVCs and be indoors, but like now we're actually standing up and, you know, going outside with our PVCs to make sure that we're voting.
And PVCs being what?
The permanent voter's card, so it's issued upon registration, and it's a one-time thing, and it allows you to vote for life, basically.
So you have yours ready?
Yes.
Both of you?
Yes.
Do all your friends have theirs?
Yes.
And what is it? Did you have yours before, or were you not old enough to vote?
No, I wasn't old enough to vote,
Right.
but now I am, and I feel like one of the criteria to be my friend right now, you have to have the PVC. If you don't have it, then
Why is that important?
Look at how Nigeria is. Like, I think we've all gotten to the point where it's like we've had enough, and we all just want better.
And complacency is part of the problem. I think in the past, young people are very used to complaining about the problems and not doing anything. And you not doing anything, you're aiding and abetting the people who put us in this situation. You can't continue to leave and continue to complain and sit on a pedestal, basically, and expect things to change. So I think we've gotten to the foot of the lion's den at this point, and people are ready to kind of take the bull by the horns and do something about it. So.
Bull by the horns.
Yes.
And
there are many bulls in this fight, by the way. I don't see many.
Real. To answer her point about like people, I feel like because we didn't necessarily have like the ability to also come out to do something, all we could do was use Twitter and talk. And at some point they tried to silence us, but we will not be silenced.
So Twitter was banned for what? Almost a year during the NSAS protest, and basically because young people were using it as an avenue to raise awareness, to communicate, to spread information that our leaders were trying to hide for the longest time. And so because of that, they tried to silence that. Thankfully, they brought it back. Maybe they thought it was not a threat, I don't know, but it's back, and that's a good thing.
Interesting. I'm going to come back to both of you. It's really exciting to have both of you. I really love your energy and how, you know, you're saying the things you're saying. I love that. And Kechi, my colleague, a business correspondent for West Africa at the BBC, just tell me again about NSAS and why or how that has played into the elections you're going into on Saturday.
Prior to NSAS, first of all, SARS, S-A-R-S, was a division of the Nigerian police force. It was supposed to be the special anti-robbery squad that was basically like a special police squad unit that was combating robbery and highway robbery at the time. But they were known for extrajudicial killings. They were also known for, arrest and disappearance of some young people, and they were targeting young people at the time. So young people who fit a certain profile, young men with dreadlocks, with piercings, with tattoos, dressed in a certain way.
These two young people are in so much trouble looking at you right now.
Exactly. So young, but it was especially young men. A few women were victims as well, but young men were the targets, and young people said it was enough. We've had enough of this special unit, and then Twitter was the tool that was used to gather people. People were venting so much at the time, and people began to protest. It was not organized by anyone. It was just young people saying we've had enough and we're heading to the street.
And so that momentum that was at that time that led to those protests, to hashtag NSAS, which trended around the world for a very long time. Do you feel like that momentum is still in play, Naomi?
Very much so. I feel like the anger that, gave us the boost to even want to set out to the street to protest against the government is still within us. Because it wasn't just us coming outside to protest and talk about what the government had done to us. There was an impact as well. And so much so that on the 20th of October 2020, may their souls continue to rest in peace. We lost quite a number of people, and I feel like there are families and people that are still feeling the impact of losing these family members, and based off of that, we're ready, like I said before.
You're ready? Ebube? When you say you're ready, what are you most ready for? What do you want to see happen?
I want to see power change hands, primarily.
That's almost a given.
Well, it's a given, but not necessarily in the way that it sounds. Power change hands drastically, let me put that. Like, to a different generation is what I mean. Because for years and years, we've had people in their 70s, 80s contesting for presidency. For goodness sake.
You do this time as well.
Well, yes, but I mean, we have a candidate who is, I'm not endorsing anybody. I am endorsing someone.
I know or you know?
I am. So, for the first time, we have someone who's quite younger in the race as well, because the largest population in Nigeria are made up of people between the demographic of 18 to about 40. Yeah. And then we have people in their 80s and 85 contesting for presidency. It doesn't make any sense. So I think I'm ready for younger people to...
Is that because you don't feel like young people are heard?
No, not necessarily. I feel like young people's interests aren't at the bottom of their hearts, to be honest. If you see an 85-year-old person, they're not thinking of, you know, building new schools. They've been to school. Their grandchildren have been to school. They're not thinking of, you know, infrastructures for the country. That's not the prime focus of their administration. But when you bring a younger person, someone who's just come out of the workforce preferably, who's barely retired, this person is in touch with what people feel at a basic level. Yeah. So I think that's it.
Yeah, to add to that, I feel like it's because they're working with the phase of life that they're in as well. Yeah, exactly. So if you're very aware of the things that people are going through, especially young people, it is much easier for you to work with them. But if you're so far from where we are, it's like, I mean, who are you working for exactly?
Right, and Nkechi, the candidates, who are they?
So we have 18 presidential candidates, but realistically we have 3 front runners. The first is Bola Ahmed Tinubu. He is from the ruling party, the All Progressives Congress. He was a two-time governor of Lagos State. Lagos is the commercial capital city of Nigeria. We have the second candidate, who is Atiku Abubakar. This is his 6th trial at the seat of the presidency. He was one-time Nigeria's vice president following the first and final return to democracy, and he's from the People's Democratic Party, which is the opposition party. And then we have a newcomer, who's President Peter Obi. He was a governor of southeastern state of Anambra, which is the commercial nerve center of the southeast, and he's from the Labour Party. It's his first time, and he's the preference for the young people.
Right, and if I come to you now, Naomi, do you guys come from the same community?
Community, you mean?
Do you speak the same language?
Oh, no, we don't.
And that's the thing I'm interested in at this point.
Yeah.
How much are these divisions that we've traditionally seen, religious divisions and tribal divisions, how much of that is affecting you young people?
Right now, 0 to none, to be honest. I feel... Maybe I shouldn't talk like a privileged individual, but in my reality, I don't see any tribal wars or any impact in the friendship. I've not seen it divide us. I feel, if anything, we're always trying to learn from one another, especially when it comes to language and barrier. For example, if I want to communicate something and I'm feeling like I want to say it in a different language,
but I mean in terms of your politics.
Oh, in terms of politics, then for me, personally, 0 to none. I don't have the bias of, oh, it's time for a Yoruba person to run, or oh, it's time for an Igbo person to run. I feel like whoever can, according to your own ability, whoever can work should work.
Do you feel the same way, Bube?
I would like to, but I don't. And the reason I'd say that is, especially for the northern community, there's always going to be a bias where they're concerned.
Right.
And, you know, when it comes to the northerners and the easterners, the southeasterners in Nigeria, there's always going to be a divide.
There's always been that division. And we're going to come back and discuss that hopefully a bit more, and many other issues that are affecting these elections. Akani, as you hear, these young people are ready, in their own words. They want to be an active part of this electoral process. They're being loud, they're being heard, and they do want to have a significant impact.
Alan, that's great to hear from you. We'll hear back from Alan in a few minutes' time. Do stay with us here on OS with me, Connie Sharp in London, and Alan Kasuja in Lagos.
This is the BBC World Service, meeting the Vietnam War veterans who left America and retired to the country they fought in.
50 years ago, on the 29th of March,
all American forces will be withdrawn from South Vietnam.
Today, a small group of U.S. veterans, now in their 70s, have returned to live there permanently.
I was expecting people to hate me when I came back.
People welcome me like I just left the day before.
I am Nafam, and I'll be finding out why they choose to retire in Vietnam.
You're ashamed of what you've seen and what you did. I say this is the only thing that makes sense, me living in Vietnam.
I came back to fight the war. I kind of explain it as when you're a little kid, you've got a monster under the bed. I had to look under the bed, and the monster wasn't there.
No place like Nam. Saturday at 12 GMT.
Hi, this is Connie Sharp, live from the BBC in London. Welcome to OS. We're following two speeches here on OS by two presidents, US President Joe Biden and Russia's Vladimir Putin, both taking place ahead of the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We've already been looking at the Russian president's speech, where he blamed the West for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now we look ahead to President Joe Biden, who is about to speak. Do stay with us to hear more on that.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. In a speech in Warsaw, President Biden's expected to urge democracies to continue defending freedom and to describe the war in Ukraine as a battle for democracy. Earlier, President Putin made a strongly anti-Western speech, blaming the West for escalating the conflict. There's been condemnation of Mr. Putin's announcement that Russia will suspend participation in the last remaining nuclear arms treaty with the US. NATO said this undid the whole arms control architecture. Berlin has denounced a death sentence imposed by an Iranian court on an Iranian-German dual national. Germany's foreign minister said Jamshid Sharmat had not had anything like a fair trial. Campaigning for Sunday's presidential election in Nigeria is drawing to a close. The candidate for the governing party, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has addressed tens of thousands of supporters. Concerns have been raised about the spread of disinformation. The UN's human rights chief has urged the new Israeli government to pause its controversial judicial reforms plans. Volker Turk said the legislation threatened to harm judges' ability to defend individual rights. Parliament in Kenya has ordered a probe into allegations of sexual abuse on tea plantations. They surfaced on Monday in a BBC report. The plantations are operated by Unilever and James Finley. The US Supreme Court will shortly consider a bid to weaken the legal protections enjoyed by social media giants. A case has been brought by the family of an American student killed by Islamist militants in Paris. They say YouTube spread extremist messages and helped recruit jihadis. Simone Seguin, one of France's last surviving female resistance fighters from the Second World War, has died at age 97. Photographs of her circulated the world, even during the war and after it ended. BBC News.
Hello, welcome to OS with me, Connie Sharp. Thank you so much for your company. It's really good to have you with us. Here on OS, we're waiting for President Joe Biden to speak in Warsaw, in Poland. It looks imminent. We're just going to bring up the sound there. He's about to speak outside the Royal Castle in Warsaw. We were looking at the screens, actually. The Polish President, Andrzej Duda, was speaking just a moment ago. Now, we're just waiting for the U.S. President, but before we actually go to his speech, he's not there. It looks like he's about to get onto the podium. Let's go first to Lagos, where my colleague Alan Kasuja is there, and he'll tell you more about why he's there and what he's doing there.
And it's unlikely that you'll hear that music coming from Lagos at this point. We're hearing a lot of hooting and a lot of cars because we are on one of the main roads that leaves the island in Lagos. Just give you a sense, Ebube, where are we right now again?
Right, we're in Alfred Ruwani, and this is Ikoyi, our definition of a suburb in Lagos.
It's a nice place.
It is a nice place. It really is. It's nice. It's tranquil. Yes, it's very decent to live in.
If this is tranquil with all that hooting going on outside.
Oh, it's tranquil, believe me.
It is. And we're talking about elections, young people and elections. Yeah. Elections are happening in 4 days. And you made a really interesting point earlier on about the fact that if your friends don't have
A PVC.
A PVC,
Yeah.
which you helped us understand to be?
Yeah, a permanent voter's card.
You will not be very happy about it. And just tell me about the conversations you're having amongst yourselves in your WhatsApp groups. Are you talking politics as young people?
Yes, we are. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones most affected by it. You have things like safety of the country, security, job opportunities, just having a decent life. The standard of living for us is what's most at stake right now. You see a large number of people leaving the country because they can't stand it anymore. I know the number of health professionals that I know that run in my circles that have had to leave the country. And then you wonder, where are we going? So if you have an emergency, I remember going into the hospital a while ago for just a regular body checkup, and I was told the only consultant that hospital had for a particular ailment was no longer in the country. So now, to get that procedure done, you have to travel all the way to Abuja. Most people can't afford that. And so young people are most interested right now because we're the ones who are most at stake. So yeah, we're having a conversation. I'd say we're having a conversation.
Yeah, and no matter how privileged you are, Nigeria is going to happen to you one way or the other. Because it's like, you feel like you're indoors, nothing is happening, you're fine, and then all of a sudden they're saying there's ASU strike.
What's ASU?
Is the Academic Staff Union, thank you very much, Union of Universities, and I guess we have lecturers under the body, and at different times they decide to go on strikes. Not decide, I mean, they have reason to, good reason if I may add. For example, because you're not being paid their fees, or they've not been paid for a long period of time by the government, and so these strikes are to pretty much get some kind of action from the government, and the government is literally not responding, and then we see ourselves at home for a month, 2, 3, and all the way to 8 months, and sometimes it could even last a year. They want to surprise us.
They want to surprise you?
Yeah.
Yes, because it was always a surprise. It always starts out as a month, as a warning strike, 2 weeks, a month, and then they're like, okay, we're going on another month. And then there's another month and another month, and it's like just imagine how it was during COVID, but this time think of it as your friends and your mates are out there in school and you're the only one on lockdown.
So these are two important issues in Kechi that the ladies have brought up. Number one, education and how things are playing out for them. These are students, so they live that reality. And then the second issue is hospitals. Ebube brought that up as well, and she's talking about the fact that, there's a brain drain there.
Exactly, Alan. First off, on the education, personally, my academic calendar was meant to be 4 years. I did that in 6 years. Now,
And it wasn't because you were struggling in class.
Alan, you think I was not doing well in school, but believe me, I am a second-class upper material. Do you understand? But the problem is, I went to school during a time where we had strikes. In my first year in university, I spent 1 year at home for strike action. My final year in university, I was home for another full year. And so I spent 6 years doing a 4-year course. I'm not counting all the insecurity issues that we had in my time. My school had to be shut down a couple of times because of insecurity issues. So this is I feel
And we've talked about, on Africa Daily, which is the podcast that I present, we've talked extensively about doctors in this country and their struggles, and some of them being recruited directly to go to the Middle East, for example.
And right now, we do not have concrete data on the amount of medical professionals that have left Nigeria, but just in the UK alone, we know that the UK Home Office, announced that about 3 doctors every week from Nigeria were relocating to the UK. They were being admitted in different hospitals in the UK. And you're asking yourself, if we have a ratio of 1 doctor to 4,000 citizens in the country, why are our medical practitioners leaving the country?
And Kechi Obona, my colleague, BBC West Africa business correspondent, Ebube and Naomi are law students at the University of Lagos.
Yeah.
Unilag, is that what it's called?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Kani Sharp is in London, keeping an eye on whether or not Joe Biden is going to speak. But before he does, we still have an opportunity to find out. So we've talked about health, we've talked about education. Right. What about security? Ebube, I spoke to someone called Tayo, who's a well-known blogger.
Okay.
And he told me that he feels safer outside Nigeria than he does in this country. Is this an issue for you?
Yes, that's true, because in Nigeria, you step out and you pray and hope that you get back home. Not because you might get hit by a bus or because, you know, maybe you might fall on the train tracks. I mean, we barely have trains. But because you might go out and get kidnapped in broad daylight. And the worst part...
something that has happened to you, someone that you know?
It happened to someone I know. Some people that I know, actually. Yeah, more than one. And then my age bracket.
Tell me about that.
Right, so I had a friend who went out for like just, let's say a small party with a group of friends, and he got kidnapped. And so his parents were called, they asked for some ransom, they delivered the ransom, and then he was released. It was a simple kidnapping, I'll put it like that.
Simple?
Yeah, simple, because he could have gotten hurt. You know, he could have been mutilated.
And these are things that happen.
Yeah, very much so. And Lagos is considered a quote-unquote safer country, safer state.
Right, and very briefly, before we go back to Kani, tell me, how will this election, how will you consider it successful?
I would consider it successful if my candidate wins.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because you think your candidate will be the one to fix things, yeah?
I was like, I know.
Yeah, you know, fair enough.
Yeah.
Kani, these young people are in many ways inspiring.
I can hear.
And they're very, and they want to talk about their issues and they want to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing your conversations, you know, yesterday as well. Alan, thank you so much. My colleague Alan Kasuja in Lagos speaking to Nigerians there ahead of Saturday's election. But we're going to cross quickly now to Warsaw in Poland, where President Biden is about to speak.
Szanowni Państwo, powitajmy 46. prezydenta Stanów Zjednoczonych Ameryki.
Sorry about that. We're trying to bring up the live feed of the president. We're going to try once again to see if we can get that feed. It's President Biden, US President Joe Biden, is to give a speech in Warsaw, Poland. He's expected to paint the war in Ukraine as a struggle between democracy and autocracy. After his visit to Kyiv on Monday. But let's go back now. I think we have that feed up.
Możliwością upadku Kijowa. Ale ja stamtąd prosiłem i mogę powiedzieć, Kijów się trzyma.
Kyiv stands proud. It stands tall. And most important, it stands free. When Russia invaded, it wasn't just Ukraine being tested. The whole world faced a test for the ages. Europe was being tested. America was being tested. NATO was being tested. All democracies are being tested. The questions we face were as simple as they were profound. Would we respond? Or would we look the other way? Would we be strong? Would we be weak? Would we, all of our allies, would be united or divided? 1 year later, we know the answer. We did respond. We would be strong. We would be united. And the world would not look the other way. We also face fundamental questions about the commitment to the most basic of principles. Would we stand up for the sovereignty of nations? Would we stand up for the right of people to live free from naked aggression? Would we stand up for democracy? 1 year later, we know the answers. Yes, we would stand up for sovereignty, and we did. Yes, we would stand up for the right of people to live free from aggression, and we did. And we would stand up for democracy, and we did. And yesterday, I had the honor to stand with President Zelensky in Kyiv to declare that we will keep standing up for these same things, no matter what. When President Putin ordered his tanks to roll in Ukraine, he thought we would roll over. He was wrong. The Ukrainian people are too brave. America, Europe, a coalition of nations from the Atlantic to the Pacific, we were too unified. Democracy was too strong. Instead of an easy victory he perceived and predicted, Putin left with burnout tanks and Russia's forces in disarray. He thought he'd get the Finlandization of NATO. Instead, he got the NATOization of Finland and Sweden. He thought NATO would fracture and divide. Instead, NATO is more united and more unified than ever before. He thought he could weaponize energy to crack your resolve, Europe's resolve. Instead, we're working together to end Europe's dependence on Russian fossil fuels. He thought autocrats like himself were tough, and leaders of democracy were soft. And then he met the iron will of America and the nations everywhere that refused to accept the world governed by fear and force. He found himself at war with a nation led by a man whose courage would be forged in fire and steel, President Zelensky. President Putin is confronted with something today that he didn't think was possible a year ago. The democracies of the world have grown stronger, not weaker. But the autocrats of the world have grown weaker, not stronger. Because in the moments of great upheaval and uncertainty, that knowing what you stand for is most important. And knowing who stands with you makes all the difference. The people of Poland know that, you know that. In fact, you know it better than anyone here in Poland. Because that's what solidarity means. Through partition and oppression, when the beautiful city was destroyed after the Warsaw uprising, during decades under the iron fist of communist rule, Poland endured because you stood together. That's how brave leaders of the opposition and the people of Belarus continue to fight for their democracy. That's how the resolve of Moldovan people, the resolve of the people of Moldova to live in freedom, when gained them independence and put them on the path to EU membership. President Sandu is here today. I'm not sure she is, but I'm proud to stand with you and the freedom-loving people of Moldova. Give her a round of applause. 1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition, but he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. He doubts our continued support for Ukraine. He doubts whether NATO can remain unified. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire. President Putin's craven lust for land and power will fail, and the Ukrainian people's love for their country will prevail. Democracies of the world will stand guard over freedom today, tomorrow, and forever. So that's what's at stake here. Freedom. That's the message I carried to Kyiv yesterday, directly to the people of Ukraine. When President Zelensky said he came to the United States in December, quote, he said, this struggle will define the world and what our children and grandchildren, how they live, and then their children and grandchildren. He wasn't only speaking about the children and grandchildren of Ukraine. He was speaking about all of our children and grandchildren, yours and mine. We're seeing again today what the people of Poland and the people across Europe saw for decades. Appetites of the autocrat cannot be appeased. They must be opposed. Autocrats only understand one word: no, no, no. No, you will not take my country. No, you will not take my freedom. No, you will not take my future. And I'll repeat tonight what I said last year in the same place. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never be able to ease the people's love of liberty. Brutality will never grind down the will of the free. And Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never. For free people refuse to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. You know, this has been an extraordinary year in every sense. Extraordinary brutality from Russian forces and mercenaries. They've committed depravities, crimes against humanity, without shame or compunction. They've targeted civilians with death and destruction, used rape as a weapon of war, stolen Ukrainian children in an attempt to steal Ukraine's future, bombed train stations, maternity hospitals, schools, and orphanages. No one can turn away their eyes from the atrocities Russia is committing against the Ukrainian people. It's abhorrent. It's abhorrent. But extraordinarily, as well, has been the response of the Ukrainian people and the world. 1 year after the bombs began to fall, Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. Ukraine is still independent and free. From Kherson to Kharkiv, Ukrainian fighters have reclaimed their land. More than 50% of the territory Russia held last year. The blue and the yellow flag of Ukraine proudly waves once again. President Zelensky still leads a democratically elected government that represents the will of the Ukrainian people. The world has already voted multiple times, including the United Nations General Assembly, to condemn Russia's aggression and support a just peace. Each time in the UN, that vote has been overwhelming. In October, 143 nations of the United Nations condemned Russia's illegal annexation. Only four in the entire UN voted with Russia. 4. So tonight, I speak once more to the people of Russia. The United States and the nations of Europe do not seek to control or destroy Russia. The West was not plotting to attack Russia, as Putin said today. And millions of Russian citizens who only want to live in peace with their neighbors are not the enemy. This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word. It's simple. If Russia stopped invading Ukraine, it would end the war. If Ukraine stopped defending itself against Russia, it would be the end of Ukraine. That's why together we're making sure Ukraine can defend itself. The United States has assembled a worldwide coalition of more than 50 nations to get critical weapons and supplies to the brave Ukrainian fighters on the front lines. Air defense systems, artillery, ammunition, tanks, armored vehicles. The European Union and its member states have stepped up with unprecedented commitment to Ukraine. Not just in security assistance, but economic...
You're listening to OS here on the BBC, and we're listening to President Joe Biden's speech in Warsaw, in Poland.
Take a moment, and I'm serious when I say this. Turn around and look at one another. Look at what you've done so far. Poland is hosting more than 1.5 million refugees from this war. God bless you. Poland's generosity, your willingness to open your hearts and your homes is extraordinary. And the American people are united in our resolve as well. All across my country, in big cities and small towns, Ukrainian flags fly from American homes. Over the past year, Democrats and Republicans in our United States Congress have come together to stand for freedom. That's who Americans are, and that's what Americans do. The world is also coming together to address the global fallout from President Putin's war. Putin tried to starve the world, blocking the ports in the Black Sea to stop Ukraine from exporting its grain, exacerbating the global food crisis that hit developing nations in Africa especially hard. Instead, the United States and the G7 and partners around the world answered the call with historic commitments to address the crisis and to bolster global food supplies. And this week, my wife, Jill Biden, is traveling to Africa to help bring attention to this critical issue. Our commitment is to the people of Ukraine and the future of Ukraine. A Ukraine that's free, sovereign, and democratic. That was the dream of those who declared Ukraine's independence more than 30 years ago, who led the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity, who braved ice and fire in the Maidan, and the Heavenly 100 who died there, and those who continue still to root out Kremlin's efforts to corrupt, coerce, and control. It's a dream for those Ukrainian patriots who fought for years against Russia's aggressions in the Donbass, and the heroes who've given everything, given their lives in the service of their beloved Ukraine. I was honored to visit their memorial in Kyiv yesterday, to pay tribute to the sacrifice of those who've lost their lives, standing alongside President Zelensky.
That's US President Joe Biden giving a speech in Warsaw, Poland, just days before, the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, I'm joined down the line by our Warsaw correspondent, Adam Easton. Adam, you and I listening to that speech together, just summarize what we've heard so far.
Well, President Biden basically said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a test for all the democracies in the world, for NATO, and posed the question, Putin poses the question to them, would they respond? Would they look the other way? And he said 1 year later, we know the answer. We did respond. The world did not look the other way. The West stood up for the sovereignty of nations, for democracy, for the right to be free from aggression. And he said, our support for Ukraine will not waver. That's the key message, I think, from this. And NATO will not be divided. That's what he's come to Warsaw to say. He said that Putin was banking on the fact that support from the West would begin to ebb away, there would be fatigue for the war, and NATO could be divided. And he said that's basically not happened. Democracies of the world have grown stronger, not weak, he said. It's the autocrats who are now weaker. He also accused Russia of committing crimes against humanity. He spoke about rapes, Ukrainian children being stolen, schools and orphanages being bombed. But as he said, 1 year on from this aggression, Ukraine is still independent and free. And another important point, he spoke directly to the Russian people. He said, we don't want to control or destroy Russia. Russian citizens are not the enemy. Putin chose this war. He could end it with one word. That's the main point so far from President Biden's speech. He's still speaking as we're talking, of course. Yes. But the key point is here. You thought we could be united. Putin thought the West could be divided. NATO could be divided. He's failed in his goals to control Ukraine and also to divide the West and divide the NATO military coalition. Yes. And
I think that message of victory and freedom, Adam, was, as you said, one of the main points. What's at stake here? He says freedom. Freedom was at stake, and Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Russian bombs fell, but Ukraine is still independent and free. We're going to go back to the president now. Let's continue listening.
Our NATO alliance and Article 5 is rock solid. And every member of NATO knows it. And Russia knows it as well. An attack against one is an attack against all. It's a sacred oath. Sacred oath to defend every inch of NATO territory. Over the past year, the United States has come together with our allies and partners in an extraordinary coalition to stand against Russian aggression. But the work in front of us is not just what we're against. It's about what we're for. What kind of world do we want to build? We need to take the strength and capacity of this coalition and apply it to lifting up the lives of people everywhere, improving health, growing prosperity, preserving the planet, building peace and security, treating everyone with dignity and respect. That's our responsibility. The democracies of the world have to deliver it for our people. As we gather tonight, the world, in my view, is at an inflection point. The decisions we make over the next 5 years.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, where our series, The Invention of Russia, continues.
To understand it now, we need to understand its past.
The principal way in which they controlled that enormous space was through fear.
In episode 2,
it was able to dispose of Poland, then it went on to defeat Napoleon. Russia had become a European superpower.
The Invention of Russia, Wednesday at 9:30 and 20 GMT. In 60 minutes, join Joe Fidgen for Outlook.
When he was growing up, Kwejo Tweniboa's family home in London was infested with cockroaches. The ceiling fell in, damp was crawling up the walls. He decided to fight on behalf of all social housing tenants and is now known as Britain's housing hero.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello, welcome to OS with me, Connie Shop. We're live from the BBC in London. We're looking at the significance of two speeches by two presidents here on OS. One by Russia's President Putin, where he blamed the West for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The other by US President Joe Biden. Both taking place just days ahead of the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. President Biden speaking now in Poland's capital, Warsaw, as we're on air, following his visit to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, on Monday, where he said freedom is at stake. In his earlier conversation with Poland's President Duda, Biden stressed the significance of US-Polish relations, saying this is a critical relationship for the United States. President Duda thanked President Biden for his trip to Kyiv, calling it an extremely spectacular strategic and political move. We're bringing you reaction and analysis here. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. President Biden has stressed that the US and other allies' support for Ukraine will not waver in a defiant speech in Poland delivered in the run-up to the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. He told a cheering crowd in Warsaw that, as he put it, President Putin's lust for power and land would fail, painting the struggle as a generational one for freedom. He said the West had stood up for democracy.
Would we stand up for the sovereignty of nations? Would we stand up for the right of people to live free from naked aggression? Would we stand up for democracy? 1 year later, we know the answers. Yes, we would stand up for sovereignty, and we did. Yes, we would stand up for the right of people to live free from aggression, and we did. And we would stand up for democracy, and we did.
There's been strong condemnation of President Putin's announcement in a speech earlier that Russia will suspend participation in the last remaining nuclear arms treaty with the United States. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said the world expected the two largest nuclear powers to act responsibly. NATO's Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, warned it made the world more dangerous.
Over the last years, Russia has violated and walked away from key arms control agreements. With today's decision on New START, the whole arms control architecture has been dismantled. I strongly encourage Russia to reconsider its decision and to respect existing agreements.
Germany has denounced as absolutely unacceptable a death sentence imposed by an Iranian court on an Iranian-German dual national. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock promised a strong reaction to the sentencing of Jamshid Sharmad, saying he hadn't had anything approaching a fair trial. Lipika Pelham reports.
Jamshid Sharmad grew up in an Iranian-German family and moved to California in 2003, where the Iranian authorities say he made statements hostile to both Islam and the Islamic Republic. He was kidnapped by Iranian intelligence agents in August 2020 while on a business trip in Dubai and taken to Iran. Rights groups say he's since been held in solitary confinement and the authorities have refused to reveal his location. The Tehran court accused him of leading an LA-based group Tonda, or Thunder in Farsi, which the court says aims to topple the Islamic Republic.
The presidential candidate for Nigeria's governing All Progressives Congress has held his final large election rally, addressing tens of thousands of supporters in a packed stadium in Lagos. Bola Ahmed Tinubu was governor of Lagos State for 8 years, and the city is key to his bid to succeed Muhammadu Buhari, who's standing down. BBC News. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner has urged the far-right-backed Israeli government to pause its controversial judicial reform plans. Volker Turk said if passed, they would undermine the judiciary's ability to defend individual rights. He said the proposals would weaken protections for minority and vulnerable groups, such as Arab Israelis, asylum seekers and LGBT people. Israel has seen huge demonstrations against the proposed legislative changes. The Kenyan Parliament has ordered an inquiry into allegations of sexual abuse on tea plantations revealed on Monday. The BBC investigation found more than 70 women had been abused by their managers at plantations operated by Unilever and James Finley. The two companies say they've suspended the managers in question and are shocked by the allegations. One of France's last surviving woman resistance fighters from the Second World War, Simone Seguin, has died at the age of 97. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
This brave and beautiful girl is a veteran of partisan fighting.
Born into a farming family near Chartres, Simone Seguin joined the French resistance in 1944, and when Chartres fell to the Allies in August of that year, she was there with the liberators. American war correspondents knew they had a good story when they saw this 18-year-old blonde in shorts and Schmeisser machine pistol bringing up the rear of a party of German prisoners. Her picture went round the world once, and then again when she took part a few days later in the liberation of Paris. Her role in the resistance was a minor one, and after the war she returned to obscurity, becoming a pediatric nurse. But her image became one of a handful that helped define the war in France, and the heroic role of some of the French in bringing the occupation to an end.
France has equalled its record dry spell as a winter drought hit several European countries. It's now gone 31 days without significant rainfall. In Italy, gondoliers are finding they can't navigate some Venetian canals as the city is hit by unusually low tides. BBC News.
Hello, welcome to OS with me, Connie Sharp, here on the BBC. Thank you so much for your company. It's great to have you with us. A tropical cyclone described as fierce is about to make landfall in southern Africa. Cyclone Freddy was upgraded to a very intense tropical cyclone just 2 days ago. Now, we are monitoring its impact here on OS, and we'll try and keep you up to date as and when we get information on that. But first, we're just days away from the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Today has been a day of symbolic words and competing speeches. First from President Putin, who spoke at length about Russia's war against Ukraine in a State of the Nation address. And just minutes ago, we heard from U.S. President Joe Biden giving his speech in Warsaw in Poland, where he said freedom is at stake. But he also said democracy in this case was too strong. Well, over the next few minutes, we're going to go through some of what both leaders have said and look at their significance when it comes to the wider war. Well, joining me now to talk about what Ukraine is making of Biden's visit to the region is Victoria Juhan, who is in Kyiv. Victoria, welcome back to OS. Remind us what we heard in that speech and how are Ukrainians hearing it back in Kyiv?
Good evening. Joe Biden just finished his speech in Warsaw, which was accompanied by very cheerful music, just like as if it were a celebration, and children waving Ukrainian and EU flags. And Joe Biden spoke about what I would say was a summary of the year that has passed. And he reminded of the challenges that him and the Western nations and Ukraine have faced. And he emphasized on successes, as he put it, namely that coalition of nations was unified, that NATO has been the strongest defensive alliance, and the response of Ukrainian people from Kherson to Kharkiv was so strong that Ukraine stands free and united. And all this speech sounded more as a summary, as a celebration and a reminder to the Western, Polish, and probably American audience of how well Joe Biden and his alliance have done this year.
And this, Victoria, came after a surprise visit to Ukraine by the U.S. president. How was that received? What are people still saying a day later?
Well, that was a huge surprise and a very, very big news in Ukraine, and people are still discussing, still sharing their thoughts and sometimes jokes and memes about Joe Biden being in Ukraine. Well, just the way it looked, you know, half of the Kyiv downtown was sealed off, and Joe Biden was seen from far away by the media, mainly not from, you know, regular people, walking in the central Kyiv with President Zelensky for just a few hours. And now in Warsaw, we see him literally in the middle of the crowd of people that he addresses. But to Ukraine, this was important and this was symbolic, because it meant that Kyiv was not that scary to come to visit and to show support. However, Ukrainians and media and pundits and politicians still wonder, would Ukraine get the very needed military support that it keeps asking for?
And what did we learn specifically about increasing Western backing of Ukraine against Russian aggression? What did the President of the United States say specifically about that?
Well, there are things that we have heard of and things we didn't hear of, and both are important. So we've learned that there will be new weapons, but those that have already been given to Ukraine, it's just that we will get more weapons, such as weapons for HIMARS, for long-range weapons, or radars, or javelins, and all that would amount to $450 million. And we also know that President Zelensky spoke to President Biden about military support that, quote, hadn't been given to Ukraine before. And what that would be fighter jets, F-16? Would that be such weapons as ATACMS? We don't know, and we haven't had any confirmation, but this is what is at stake for many in Ukraine, because many believe that this would determine the further fate of this war.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder to look back at that promise. Now, we also heard from President Putin in his State of Nation address. Has there been any reaction to that at all from within Ukraine?
Yes, on the one hand, his address was and is still very widely quoted in Ukrainian media, in social media. But on the other hand, there are a few serious reactions. Probably the most top-level reaction was Mikhailo Podolyak from President Zelensky's office. He was tweeting during Putin's address, and to sum up his reaction was he said that Putin's state of address illustrated his irrelevance and confusion. But this doesn't mean that Ukraine doesn't react to this event. Just to give you a little bit of context, these days, schools were recommended to work online within the nearest several days, because Ukraine is afraid that Russia may increase its attacks due to the upcoming anniversary.
Victoria Juhan in Kiev, thank you very much for that. Well, also listening to the Biden speech is my correspondent in Washington, Barbara Platt-Asher, who joins us now. Barbara, welcome back to OS. Before we go into the details of the speech, how is his visit being viewed in the United States, this visit to Poland and his visit yesterday to Kyiv?
Well, I would say that President Biden has been the leader globally in rallying support for Ukraine and in keeping that support steadfast. And that has been the message of his visit and of his speech, that America will stay steadfast as the war enters its second year, which is a message aimed at the world, but also at the U.S. public, because although there is still a majority backing for the kind of support U.S. is giving Ukraine, it is softening, and President Biden wants to underscore to the public why it is important to keep it up, and also to counter that minority of Republican voices who question for how long the U.S. can continue it, especially as it's not clear how long the war will continue. I was speaking with America's former ambassador to Russia, yesterday, and he told me that the U.S. and its allies have to be prepared for a long conflict. He didn't think the war would end this year, and certainly President Putin made clear in his speech that he wasn't about to end it.
Yeah, and you spoke about that, I suppose, falling support there. President Biden painted a picture of the U.S., he says, where people stand for freedom. He says Democrats and Republicans alike have got behind the Ukrainian cause. Does this genuinely have bipartisan support, though?
Yes, it does. There were a lot of Republicans at the Munich Security Conference, which took place a few days ago, including the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and they were talking about support for Ukraine and how important that was. And I think they probably made that trip and gave that message because they wanted to counter what is, as I said, a minority of Republicans who are questioning the level of aid and whether it should continue. So those questioning voices are there, but it doesn't mean that there isn't still bipartisan support for the aid.
And Barbara, we also heard from President Putin in his State of Nation address earlier. He made one major announcement. He said that he was looking to suspend Russia's participation in the New START program. Can you remind us what that is and what's the significance of that announcement?
The New START program is the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement between the U.S. and Russia. So what it does is it sets a limit for the number of long-range nuclear warheads that they can deploy, and it also limits the use of weapons that can carry nuclear heads, and it allows mutual inspections. So President Putin's argument is that it didn't make sense to allow the U.S. to inspect the bases where Russia keeps its bombers that delivers these nuclear weapons because he said Ukraine was targeting them, and the U.S. would only pass its findings on to Ukraine and they would carry out further attacks. The significance of his announcement, it's not going to change the status quo very much, because those inspections were suspended during COVID, and then the Russians found reasons to deny them after that. And already last month, the State Department announced that Russia was out of compliance with obligations. And I should add that President Putin did not pull out of the treaty. He suspended Russia's participation. So the treaty still exists. But all of this reflects a changing political climate, of course, that doesn't bode well for arms control.
Barbara Plett-Usher in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for that. This is OS on the BBC with me, Connie Sharp. We're live from our studios in London. Let's take a look at three other stories in the news. A South Korean court has ruled that a gay couple has the same legal rights as heterosexual couples. It's an unprecedented decision as South Korea doesn't recognize same-sex marriage. The Seoul High Court ruled the national health insurance provider had to offer benefits to the gay partner of a man who received insurance through his employer. An Iranian organization has said the man who attacked the novelist Salman Rushdie last August will receive a plot of land in Iran as a reward. The 75-year-old author lost an eye and the use of one of his hands in the assault. Iran has denied involvement. Mr. Rushdie has long-faced death threats after the publication of his book, The Satanic Verses, which some Muslims find blasphemous. And the burnt-out shell of a Formula One car that saved Romain Grosjean, saved his life in his fiery crash at the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix, is to go on show. The chassis from the accident will be a key exhibit at a new official Formula One exhibition. It will start in Madrid next month after touring the globe. Well, as we've been discussing, U.S. President Biden has been speaking to huge crowds at the Royal Castle in Poland's capital, Warsaw. It comes a day after he visited Ukraine. We heard the analysis from my colleagues Barbara Plett-Usher in the United States and Victoria Juhan in Ukraine. But if you missed the speech, here is some of it. Let's take a listen.
Well, I just come from a visit to Kyiv, and I can report Kyiv stands strong. Kyiv stands proud, it stands tall, and most important, it stands free. When Russia invaded, it wasn't just Ukraine being tested, the whole world faced a test for the ages. Europe was being tested, America was being tested, NATO was being tested, all democracies are being tested. And the questions we faced were as simple as they were profound. Would we respond, or would we look the other way? Would we be strong? Would we be weak? Would we, all of our allies, would be united or divided? 1 year later, we know the answer. We did respond. We would be strong. We would be united. And the world would not look the other way. We also face fundamental questions about the commitment to the most basic of principles. Would we stand up for the sovereignty of nations? Would we stand up for the right of people to live free from naked aggression? Would we stand up for democracy? 1 year later, we know the answers. Yes, we would stand up for sovereignty, and we did. Yes, we would stand up for the right of people to live free from aggression, and we did. And we would stand up for democracy, and we did. And yesterday, I had the honor to stand with President Zelensky in Kyiv to declare